So I submitted a proposal to speak a bit about the scientific basis of energetic healing, and as I thought about it, I decided I really didn't like that title, but it was a little late, and so I changed it to a scientific basis. I'm a chiropractor. My specialty is cranial adjusting, so energetic medicine, sort of a sideline, a interest of mine for about 40, 45 years, but I'm not a practitioner day in and day out of this stuff, but it seems to me in my studies that there are probably different types of energy systems going on in the body. You know, I think younger, I always was sort of enamored with the concept that somewhere there's a root system and that somehow everything relates to that one system. But I have to wonder, and if anybody's got any feedback on this, I'd love to hear about it, that it's maybe more like a car. You know, you see car, but there are various subsystems, all interdependent. One can't work without the others. Or the thing doesn't work the same without the others. And I have to suspect that something like that occurs in energy work. But what I do propose is hopefully to give you some insight from research studies as to a probable mechanism, a theoretical mechanism, one facet of energy kind of healing. And I have certain intentions that I brought for the presentation. One is that you learn something, make it useful. A little more specifically, that each person gain something useful that helps them as a practitioner, helps them be a better doctor or better provider of healthcare to other people. And hopefully you'll see why later I'm making a special point about my intention for this presentation. Energetic healing, I'm preaching to the choir here, the oldest form of healing on the planet, starting, the I Ching was how old? 5,000 years or something now? Does anybody remember that one? At least 3. Older than us, long time, and all major systems of healing all speak of some sort of invisible energy force, and they have different names. Honestly, I forgot who uses dynamic vitality. Does anybody know? Does that sound familiar? I didn't make it up. I got it from somewhere. Okay, and I certainly don't remember. There are difficulties in the popularization, if you will, of energetic medicine, which interestingly back at the turn of the century was probably more on the forefront of healing than is pharmacological medicine, chemistry, and so on. But the tide kind of changed. One, because, gee, it doesn't make as much money as pharmaceuticals. It's a little more difficult sometimes with reliability, with reproducibility, and so on. Maybe it's more difficult, maybe not, but it's perceived to be. There's public opinion. There's not real good definitions of or tangible ways of measuring all the time. Obviously, there are ways to measure, but they're not that accepted. But the mechanisms are different. Most of healthcare these days is aimed at a mechanistic approach. Oh, we find the disease, and then we can extract the cure for the disease. When in reality, the body heals itself, and as you've seen from the other lecturers, you're really trying to find out what that person needs to restore self-healing. And so there's a whole different paradigm in research, and the kind of research to begin to more popularize and quantify energetic medicine is just the antithesis of what's currently accepted now as scientific, which I have to tell Dr. Yu, that's a brilliant name for this conference, the accidental cure. that's just perfect. The more I think about it, it's just amazing. So, energy, electromagnetic spectrum. You've seen this kind of chart. This chart I found, interestingly, they actually put people in there because it is thought, and we will see some of the research, that people actually produce energy in form, and that is about the range, somewhere right in this vicinity in the electromagnetic spectrum. Obviously, and you've seen some of the other presenters, other portions of the spectrum, light, microwaves, radio waves, all these other forms of energy can affect here. But even Einstein demonstrated or postulated, then further demonstrated, things like gravity, which is one form of energy, changes light, and so on. So these various forms do interrelate. Electromagnetic frequencies, we know about these things, EMF waves, various forms of radiation, they all have a wave form. There are natural EMFs. The Earth produces an EMF, Schumann's frequencies. Anybody know about Schumann's frequencies or not heard of Schumann's frequencies? Look it up, interesting stuff. Some of the evidence. Gorgez-Lakovsky. Gorgez, Russian guy, simple observation started little ball rolling in his head. He was watching carrier pigeons who have uncanny ability to go from point A to home, or point Z to home, and he was noticing that when they were going around certain radio towers, that they became disoriented. And so he postulated that somehow radio waves were interfering with something there, with their guidance mechanism. One of the early experiments, so he began to suspect that electromagnetic radiation somehow interfered also with health. And the simple early experiment that he did, he took geraniums, plants, and he inoculated them with a plant cancer. So all of these plants got these little cancerous growths on them. And he did one simple little thing. He built little shields around some of the plants. And the plants that were shielded from extraneous radiations were able to heal themselves of the cancers. And those that were not shielded did not. Thought that was kind of interesting. He actually then, his research started to become rather well known, and Hitler heard about him, sent the Gestapo after him. This was just pre-World War II. He was smuggled out of the country through Austria, which happens to be sort of the story of my grandfather, smuggled out of Austria to avoid the German army. Not the Germans inventing all the cool stuff, the volmeters and so on, but the political guys at the time, where he ended up in New York and eventually ran into a guy named Nikola Tesla. And he built what's called a multiple wave oscillator. So interesting device. Has anybody used an MWO? Familiar with them? Pretty interesting device. It simply produces a field that is comprised of the full range of frequencies that he theorized bodies needed. Now, what Lakovsky came to believe is that all parts of the body, cells, organs, collections of cells, systems, and even if we look at a cell, inside the cell are hundreds of little organelles. And he thought each of these produced were oscillatory circuits, that somehow they would resonate and vibrate and give off radiations. And that if you could produce a field that had all the radiational, vibrational frequencies needed, and you can sit in that field, then every cell, organ, organelle would get a chance to sort of reset. And we've had some very impressive changes with a multiple wave oscillator. I have a reproduction, an exact reproduction of one of Lakhovsky's. I actually have two. Somebody wanted to buy one, I bought one, and then they didn't want it. So if anybody is interested in a beautiful new MWO, let me know. We don't use those words, but he worked with cancer, he worked with joint problems and skin issues, and if you look up his books, there's some very impressive, compelling photographs of some of his stories, some of his successes, and he was very good at reporting those that failed also. Excuse me. Interestingly, right at the same time period, another gentleman, George Washington Cryle, an American surgeon, one of the co-founders of Cleveland Clinic. Actually, I think some of his surgical stuff is still used today. He invented the spider clamp and various other little things. Quite a brilliant guy. Came to the same conclusions that there's this vibratory system produced by living creatures, by living things, that is somehow responsible and essential for healing of bodies. Far less renowned, Alexander Duprov. Now this is a little later, this is, I believe, 1940s, 1950s. And Alexander did some interesting experiments. He took chicken embryo cells and cultured them. So now Alexander could make a line of cells that were all related. And he did things like take a separated Petri dish and then do some kind of toxic input on one side, and those cells would die, and of course the other side would not. But then he did something interesting. He took a glass divider on those dishes, poison one side, those cells die, the other side, nothing happens. Change that out for a quartz divider, poison one side, a couple of days later, the other side dies. And he was then even able to measure certain biotransmissions, some biophoton transmissions. He got the idea because glass will not transmit certain frequencies that quartz will. He also did things like would put a mirror above two separate cultures so that radiations could bounce between these two cultures. Injure one side, the other side also got sick. So somehow, similar cells are communicating, and he started getting some kind of evidence as to what range of communication, of energetic exchanges were going on. I've had the great fortune to communicate with Alexander.